So I took the saw and I did the back and forth motion over the rib cage, and you could hear the ribs cracking, and it was so weird. Hey fam, my name is Elsa Fam, and today I'm here to tell you about all the cool things I did in Cadaver Lab. I think the hardest part about this class was how smelly it is. Anytime I spent any time in that lab, I would stink like formaldehyde, and it was awful. I would have to immediately come home and take a shower and wash all my clothes, otherwise it would keep stinking. And besides that, I would say that it was very physically demanding because we would spend hours hovering over a body, whether we're skinning the back or we're studying the muscles. Whatever it is, it took a lot of hours and it took a lot of physical work to get to the material that we were studying. Most days after lab, I would be absolutely exhausted. But that was just the price you had to pay. Some schools opt out for online cadaver labs, so I'm absolutely grateful for being given this opportunity. Because learning this stuff in person is absolutely not the same as learning it online. After skinning the back and learning about all the different layers of the muscles, one of the coolest things we did was perform a laminectomy. So we have the stacks of the vertebra, and one of the section of it is called the lamina. And we had to take that section out to be able to look at the spinal cord. And since we're not surgeons, we did it the old-fashioned way with a chisel and a hammer. So we did this motion on the lamina, and then we took it out to be able to look at the spinal cord. And that absolutely blew my mind, and it was very fun to do. When we flipped the cadavers on the front of their body, we were going to study their rib cage, and all the groups were given an electronic saw to cut out the rib cage area, except my group didn't have one. So we were just waiting in line for the next saw to open up when our professor came up to us, and he handed me a manual saw and he said, "Don't wait for the electronic one, just use this and go." So of course I took it, and then I just kept going like this on the body of the cadaver, and you could just hear the ribs breaking, and it was really weird, but I did have to do it anyway, and we took the whole rib cage out so that we can look inside. The first thing we looked at were the lungs, and they were a lot bigger than I expected, and they were very light and super spongy. When we squished them, a lot of the liquids came out, and it was so light. I guess I just didn't expect that. So my cadaver had an enlarged heart to the point where the heart pushed the lungs backwards. So we had the heart on top of the lungs instead of the lungs being on top, which I thought was really cool. We took out the lungs, we studied the lungs, we dissected the different sections, and then we finally dissected the heart out of the body, and it was amazing. I held a human heart for the first time in my hands, and I couldn't believe it. At that point, my classmates were pretty tired out, so I had the privilege of dissecting the entire heart by myself. So I dissected the atrium, the ventricles, a little portion of the aorta as well. We looked for the valves and the different types of muscle fibers, and it was a really good lab. But when we were cleaning up the heart and we were trying to study the veins and arteries that are all around it, I wanted to wash out the inside of the bigger veins and arteries, so I took the heart to the sink to clean it out. And I had my classmate turn on the faucet, but the faucet came out with so much force that the water came down, went inside the aorta, and it splashed me right in my face. So that may have been a little gross. Obviously, I went ahead, washed my face, rinsed out my eyes, and I was fine. But this is why you should always wear eye goggles when you're in lab, kids. We saw so many cool things in all the bodies. For example, my person was missing a gallbladder, and you could see the staples where his surgery was. One body had diverticulitis, and you could see the little pockets on their intestines. Some cadavers had really enlarged organs. You could see the remaining signs of lung cancer on one of the lungs. One cadaver had their uterus removed, another one had cysts in her uterus. My cadaver was also missing a kidney. We found pacemakers on a couple cadavers. One had breast implants, one had an intestinal resection, and we found plates on knees and elbows and wrists, along with a lot of anatomical variations, which was very fascinating. As I've said before, it was absolutely priceless to be able to visually see the material that we were learning in class. For example, we learned the brachial plexus in lecture, but when we saw it in person, everything just kind of clicked. You can look at the brachial plexus on a cadaver and you can point out the roots, the trunks, the divisions, the cords, and the terminal branches. You can name every single nerve that you see right here, along with what roots they come from, whether they come from lateral or medial divisions. And that is how our exams were structured too. He would point at a random artery or vein or nerve or something of the sort, and he would ask us what are its roots, or what muscle would this nerve innervate, or what does this artery supply. And you would really need to understand the body structure to be able to correctly answer that question, which is why I spent hours in that lab. Most of my weekends over the past few months have been spent at this very lab, and I feel like I have a better understanding of the human body because of it. Besides the bloody water getting in my eyes, we also had to dissect the rectum, which would have been fine, but even though we squeezed the material out and then we tied off the rectum and then we cut the intestine, a little bit of poop still came out. And it was very green and it got everywhere and I had to clean that up, and that was not very good of an experience. But besides that, the penis dissection was absolutely fascinating. I personally didn't do it, I had my classmate do it, which I'm okay with. But you could really see how the spermatic cords leads to the scrotum and all the layers covering the testes. It was amazing how much anatomy we learned just from that one lab. We also looked at the upper and the lower limbs, which was kind of weird for me because some of them had their nails painted. And when you look at a hand or a leg of a cadaver, it looks very like it's a normal person. And the fact that we were cutting them open just took a little bit of getting used to. And lastly, I want to talk about the head and the brains. So we ended up not decapitating our cadaver because our professor didn't need us to, possibly because we ran out of time, but I'm not sure. Instead, we spent more time studying the neck muscles and the brain. So in order to get to the brain, we had to peel off the entire face and we had to peel off the entire scalp as well. Then we performed a full craniotomy where we took a saw and we just cut around the skull like so. There was sawdust everywhere and it smelled horrible. But at least this time we had an electric saw, and what we did was that we took the saw and we went around the head like this, and then we just kind of took off the scalp. Then our professor came over and he helped us take the brain out of the head and he handed it to us, and that was the coolest thing ever. I held a human brain in my head and I was freaking out at how amazing it was. You could see every single cranial nerve coming off the brain. And when you look inside the skull, you can see all the little spots where the cranial nerves would go through, all the holes. For example, our professor would point at a structure and say what goes through there, and you would have to know that that is the jugular foramen, and it is the cranial nerve 9, 10, 11, along with the jugular vein goes through there. So the amount of stuff that you need to know and you get to learn is mind-blowing. Also, on multiple of the brains, you could see a perfect circle of Willis, which was so cool because it shows you the complete blood circuit of the brain and how the brain is getting its fuel from. And you can also see some variations on certain cadavers, and it was just overall one of the best experiences I've ever had. Despite how stinky it made me and how nauseated it made me feel at some times, it was like one in a lifetime opportunity. And I'm so beyond grateful for being given the chance to experience it. I really hope that you get to do a cadaver lab as well. It is absolutely worth it. It will teach you so many things that you simply cannot learn in any other way. And despite how physically laboring it is and how tired and exhausted you're going to be afterwards, it is irreplaceable. I hope I'm getting you excited for anatomy, and if you don't have a cadaver lab, at least still be happy that you're going to get to know so much about the human body. The amount of knowledge you're going to have about how the body works is phenomenal. And I truly hope that you get to enjoy the journey. You're gonna do amazing. I wish you all the best. My name is Fam and I'm a PA student. If you're interested in my PA journey, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.